Okay. All right. So I want to welcome those of you who are here. As I told Shelly, there was a Jewish Nevada event that got scheduled up against us. So we may be short some of our usuals, though I heard from some of them that they will check out the recording later. So that's good. So let me quickly introduce Shelly because I want to hear from her and I don't want to hear me. But you see her in one of the little squares, or maybe you have her highlighted completely. There she is waving. That's a Shelly Christensen. She has an MA and she is a fellow of the American Association of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, which is an organization that honored her in 2021 with the Reimagining Spirituality Leadership Award. She has 20 years of experience working in this area. She's a CEO of Inclusion Innovations, which is an organization that does counseling and speaking and training to Jewish and interfaith organizations. And she co-founded Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month, which I think, is that March? It was
February.
February. It was February. She lives near Minneapolis. She's coming to you from the Central Time Zone with her husband, Rick. But most importantly, she has two clearly Jewish Shelties because they're named Penina and Caleb. And I want to add that Shelly has already enriched us because it turned out that Sinai Zoom did not have, I'm not quite sure I understand all the tech, but didn't have universally this closed captioning option on, which it now does. And some of you are probably seeing it on your screen because I haven't figured out how to make it just work for a person who wants it. So we're getting it across the board. But the nice thing about now we not only have it, is that it saves a transcription as well. So this is something that we didn't have going on for how many years now, 2 or 3? And so thank you, Shelly, for bringing that to our attention, and I will give it to you.
Thank you, Myra. Wow. Hi, everybody. It's so good to be here. I wish I was there in person because I think the weather's better there. Yeah, but I get to be with you today and through the wonders of Zoom. So good. And yes, the captioning, Zoom captioning is pretty good as far as captioning goes. And if you see on the bottom of your screen, it says, there's a little box that says CC, live transcript. If you click on that, you'll be able to see the subtitles. So you'll have this up there. I have to say, this particular transcription mangles Hebrew unbelievably. And I think that's why I've talked to a number of synagogues that have said, well, yeah, we have so much going on in Hebrew and it doesn't work, yet accessibility in English would be really nice for many of us. I don't know about you, I have captioning on our TV all the time now. It's just a habit. So
I want to introduce you, just came on with Jeff Dingle. He is my co-chair for all of this series. And he's just, Jeff, you look good. He's just coming back from some really serious back surgery. So it's great to see you, Jeff.
Oh,
Thank you.
Refuah shlema.
Nice to see. Tada rabba.
Bavakasha. That was Kadaka Bakasha. See? Telling you. Oh my gosh. So I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint. I guess because I'm PowerPointed out and it's so, on our screens, it's there, you can't see the people and everything. But I also recognize that it is another modality, another way to access the information. So I did do a PowerPoint and I will try and keep it entertaining and get it over with as soon as possible. My hope is that the PowerPoint will just help us all remember. It'll help us have conversation. And that's really the aim of this talk and our time together, is to really have a robust conversation on the ideas that ableism presents and how we'll have a chance to understand ableism, certainly, like the other isms. There it is. And ways to think differently in order that all people feel a sense of belonging. And it's going to be a good time together. So welcome and thank you. And thank you, Rabbi, for bringing me to you guys today. This is my family. These are the Christensens. We spell it the Jewish spelling. Just saying. I get that question all the time from Jewish and not Jewish organizations and people. Are you Jewish? Yes, born and raised Jewish. My husband converted to Judaism after 18 years of marriage without any prompting from me whatsoever. Our agreement was Jewish family, Jewish everything. And it has been just amazing. And my very first reaction was, oh, good, now we can be buried together. And my second reaction was to call my mom and dad. And my dad was actually a few months before my dad died from cancer. And I called my parents. I said, Mom, Dad, you're finally getting that Jewish son-in-law you've always wanted. Made everybody happy. And so my story really comes from this collection of amazing human beings in my life. We have 3 sons, Aaron, Jacob, and Zach, and our daughter-in-law, Nancy, and then 4 grandchildren. Thank you, God, and especially love the granddaughters after raising 3 boys and having 2 grandsons. It's really kind of a trip. Our middle son, Jacob, was diagnosed when he was about 6 years old with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I thought my first reaction was, well, what did I do to cause this? Why? I did something. I'm his parent. I'm supposed to take care of him. Now he has this, what I didn't know what it was. Is it a disease? What is it? And I thought, this is not what I signed up for. But of course, go for it. We had to. And we were very lucky to work with a wonderful group of teachers at his elementary school. In our religious school at Bet Shalom Congregation in Minnetonka, Minnesota, it was like a place of inclusion. It was a castle of inclusion. It was a kahila of inclusion. He was never treated any differently, and he really flourished. And I've been a tutor at Bet Shalom for 23 years. In fact, I just gave my notice. But in all that time, I've met so many kids and worked with so many kids who are neurodiverse, who have, their wiring is their wiring, their brain wiring is their brain wiring. And it's just a joy to be able to teach children according to their way. So that's my impression of the Jewish community was that, well, we're in the public school arena, things are really difficult and it's just a battle every step of the way, which it became when he got to middle school. In the Jewish community, everything was great, in my view, but not so much in the view of other parents and people with disabilities. And the long and short of it is that I went to graduate school, got my master's degree in developmental disabilities, and my focus was on parenting children with disabilities and what that experience is like. And I really thought my research centered around universal feelings, universal responses, and how to manage those and how to collaborate with everybody involved in a child's life. It was, I think, groundbreaking for the time. And I was so invested in a career and becoming a professional in this field of disability in some way. And lo and behold, Jewish Family and Children's Service of Minneapolis was looking for someone to start a program that worked with all the community organizations to foster inclusion, to ensure that people with disabilities across the lifespan were involved in Jewish life. And that was just my calling. And so I've been doing it ever since. I was with JFCS for 13 years, and it was phenomenal. And now, of course, I get to work in interfaith programming and just collaborating, and it's been interesting. It's been great. So I want to just say that when I started working in the Jewish community in Minneapolis, my experience was very different. My experience of acceptance and inclusion was very different than what was happening in the community in general. And it took a lot of conversations and really listening and sitting down with rabbis and education directors and executive directors, boards, and certainly sitting down with family members and people with disabilities to really understand their different perspectives, and just met everybody where they were. And that formed a foundation for the work that I do and that many of my colleagues are now doing. And it's what really drove me was a sense not of doing mitzvahs for people with disabilities, much the opposite, of understanding and recognizing that people with lived experience just want to belong like anyone else. And that brings us to ableism, because there's been resistance forever. There's resistance, and ableism is resistance. It's like the other isms. It's just seeing somebody for in one single way. So we're gonna, yes. So this is I love this, because this is really a whole kind of a morphing into the conversation about ableism. It is, I think I can do this. There is this distinction that we think people with disabilities, people who are different. And so you can really apply a lot of this, I think, to some of the other areas that you've been talking about and studying together. What do you think they want? We're gonna do something nice for them, or, well, we got to do something because it's the law. They don't really count. They don't really matter. But then the whole listening thing is, if we really listen to someone, what is it that's important to you? That's the question. And that's where these answers come from, but nobody's listening in this particular slide. The approach, societal approach, ableism, is fueled by stereotypes, by myths, by assumptions. And in the Jewish community, certainly, I'm not sure exactly how much this is resonating still, but the idea that we're so focused on education and kids, we measure our children's and others' success by their education, and never look, and for people with disabilities, for kids with disabilities who learn in different ways, who maybe behave in different ways, it's never been a question of, let's celebrate that unique human being like anyone else. So that whole mindset of, to be considered a successful Jew, you have to follow the kind of that certain road of education, of success, of money, of all of these things. And that really left a lot of people out. It left a lot of families out, and it created religious communities that were devoid of people with disabilities. When I first started my work, I called a synagogue. This is like my favorite story to tell, because I called the synagogue and I talked to the cantor of that synagogue. He happened to be the cantor of the synagogue I grew up in, so we knew each other. And I told him about my new job working with the community to support inclusion of people with disabilities. And he said, "Oh, that's wonderful. I'm so glad you're doing that." He said, "And you know what? We don't have any people with disabilities here." And I went, do you know 20% of our population in this country live with a disability? Worldwide, it's 15%. And I think that's only because there's a lot of countries that don't ask the question for whatever reason when they're doing their census. So 20%. And a lot of times people with disabilities have a mental health condition too. I have attention deficit disorder, and I live with depression and anxiety. And I'm just human like anybody else, certainly. But the thing is that there's a lot of disabilities that have a mental health component attached to it also. And then the percentage increases dramatically. The pandemic. I mean, how many of you have ever felt that sense of isolation over this period of time? And yeah. We need our community. We need each other. Thank God for Zoom, because there were those dark days when we didn't have any of that. And we're not fully there, but we're having these conversations now about how isolation has affected us, the loss of things that we depend on in our lives that were always a part of our life suddenly gone like that, and so many more things. And interestingly, the pandemic has opened up so much programming to people living with a disability who maybe could not get to a synagogue or had some obstacles there that can now participate online. There's just so much going on that way. It really, in a lot of ways, a lot of people, like anybody else, kept their communities going, our communities going. So these are things to keep in mind as we start deconstructing ableism, because we're going to make it go away, I think. There we go. All right. This is the definition of ableism. It's in a world that wasn't built for people with disabilities in mind. The world we live in is inherently ableist. Oh, I see a typo there. I'm just sorry about that. I'm sensitive to my own typos. So ableism is the discrimination of and social prejudice toward people with disabilities based on the belief that the abilities of people who are not disabled are superior. At its heart, ableism is rooted in this assumption that people with disabilities are not the same as everyone else. And of course, Torah tells us differently, of course, that we're all created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. Our greatest leader, Moses himself, did not believe he could be a leader of the people and lead the people out of Egypt because of the way he spoke. And yet God said, yeah, you're the guy who made you that way. That was me. That was God. So let's, you're the one. And I'll give you an accommodation. I will give you the first known accommodation in the history of the world, at least written. Aaron became the spokesperson for Moses. He was Moses' megaphone. So we come from that. There's just so much in Torah and Tanakh about people with disabilities, whether or not it's how people are treated. And just one of my other favorites, and one that my Rabbi Norman Cohen talks about a lot, is the tent flaps where Abraham and Sarah were by the roadside after Abraham's circumcision, and 3 strangers appeared, and Abraham welcomed them, beyond welcomed them. He washed their feet, provided the best food. Well, Sarah did, and the other people. I don't think Abraham was in the kitchen, but just saying. But it was that sense of not just hospitality, but value, seeing that connection between entities, between people, that really makes that story so sweet and really becomes, I think, an example of who we can be. There's this assumption that people with disabilities need fixing or help. And this assumption defines people by their disability. All people in wheelchairs, all people who use wheelchairs. Oh, they can just sit in the back of the sanctuary, but wait, they can't get in the building because it's not set up to get in the building. It's something has to be fixed, right? And so oftentimes we'll see people being turned away because a synagogue, for example, doesn't know what to do. They just don't know how to incorporate and include somebody with a disability. And of course, what's the answer to that? Ask the person. That's the thing. So disability, like gender, like race, like age, all the isms, put people in a jar and label them the BIPOC, the this. So we need to be really, I think, mindful so much. The impact of ableism comes across in the language that we use. The language we use sets up them and us, those people. We don't know about those people. We don't have those people here. Or categorically, as we've mentioned. And communication is like really key in how we think about people and so forth. You've heard euphemisms in our vocabulary as we describe disability. First of all, we've heard things like the disabled, the handicapped. Disability is the proper term, the preferred term, the non-judgmental term to refer to somebody with a disability. Handicap. A handicap is something that is a barrier to participation. So stairs for a person who uses a walker or a wheelchair. Think about this one. This is kind of an easy fix, actually, when we're in our buildings. Are you back in your building? Sometimes.
Yeah, we are hybrid back at this point.
Yeah. Okay. So just think about in the sanctuary, the lighting in the sanctuary. Is it good lighting so somebody can see the prayer book, the commentary? There's a microphone used all the time when somebody is talking, so somebody can hear. Some congregations have reading glasses. I'm wearing those reading glasses right now. I'm kind of a newbie, just having had cataract surgery. But there's just some simple things that can be done. So without them, yeah, it's a handicap because it makes it difficult for somebody to participate. So those are just some of those ideas. And then the language, this euphemism of that people use, wheelchair bound, confined to a wheelchair. Wheelchair actually gives a person the freedom to go from place to place. It's not binding and it's not confining. It's only binding and confining if there's no access for that wheelchair, if there's not an elevator, or if a program hasn't been moved to a space that's accessible, for example. People of all abilities, differently abled. What does that even mean? These are terms that are frequently used to describe disability, a person with a disability, but they really have no meaning. It's just not saying disability. It's like, oh, we'll be kinder and gentler. We'll say physically challenged, able-bodied. We'll say this person has intellectual challenges. Then there's also normal and abnormal, a victim of, suffers with, afflicted by. So these are the kinds of things really that make disability, that thing that somebody has, the forefront. It's what we see. It's who we just see that, really, that single story. Euphemistic language can promote pity. I'm doing a talk in a couple months for the Institute on Theology and Disability, and it's called I'm Not Your Mitzvah Project. I like to think, and I know this is true, that people with disabilities are people who can perform mitzvot like anybody else. So that's a different concept, an unusual concept, but not really, because it makes a whole lot of sense, doesn't it? Neurodiversity is really the language when we talk about neurodiversity. Neurodiversity really refers to brain wiring, how a person's brain is wired. It really describes the idea that people experience and interact with the world in many ways, so that there's no one right way of thinking, learning, behaving, interacting, and differences are not viewed as deficits. Neurodiversity refers to the diversity of all people. It's often used in the context of autism spectrum disorders, learning disabilities, ADHD, traumatic brain injury. And this idea of neurodiversity is really becoming a big, kind of a big way of describing who we are, that we are all quite neurodiverse. And it is aimed to increase acceptance and inclusion of all people while embracing neurological differences. I have a really good friend, Dr. Stephen Shore. He's autistic. He has done a tremendous amount of research in the impact of autism and with his lived experiences. And he is always saying this: don't look at what people can't do and don't assume what people can't do, because people have tremendous strengths and abilities and gifts. And those are the things that, as allies, we can help people present those and share those with the rest of the world. So we've got all that under our belts, and this is so important. And if you want to listen to the TED Talk by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, it was, I think, filmed in, I think it says 2014 there. I can't see it because, yep, 2014. It's a TED Talk, and it's called The Danger of a Single Story. And this is essentially just kind of summing up. She said that the consequence of just seeing one thing about that person, what you see, it ultimately robs people of their dignity and their humanity and focuses on what makes us different than how we're similar. So just kind of think about that, tuck that in, and think about how somebody might see you as a single story by appearance, and how you see someone else. Okay, so this is powerful. And then my colleague Bill Gaventa talks about trust what you would do with anyone else, in terms of, just in terms of having a conversation with somebody. If you're at the synagogue and there's somebody new or somebody you don't know very well, and having a back and forth conversation with them, not an interview, but to just do what you do with anybody else. That's just a gift. And Bill said, don't let disability dominate the conversation. There are so many parts to people, and they will appreciate being sought after and known. This is one of my favorite books. Are you familiar with Le Petit Prince, The Little Prince? I read it in French in college, and I was like, I'm going back to English. I'm sure it's great. It's like, no, it'll hit me better in English. So the truth is, when we see other people as people who have gifts, strengths, contributions, performers of mitzvot, friends, participants, subject matter experts, we acknowledge all of us want to belong. And that helps us realize we have so much more than what is visible to the eye. And this is really what the single story leads to. What is essential is invisible to the eye. And I love that. There's so much there. There's so much richness. We used to talk about inclusion like for years. Inclusion. We're working on inclusion. We want to be inclusive. I think that's an aspiration. But the real tachlis, the real joy in the journey is to have a sense of belonging, our own sense of belonging, which we're going to just talk about next, and to encourage other people to belong, not by fixing, not by assuming, but simply by asking what's important to you. So let's have this conversation, okay? And I think because we're a small group, we could do this by chat, or we could do this by simply just come into the conversation. Okay, so here we go. So the first thing to think about is, what are some of the things that give you a sense of belonging as a member of your synagogue, as a member of the Jewish community? Let's focus on, or your spirituality. Let's focus on the Jewish part of our lives for this conversation. So what are some of the things that give you a sense of belonging in your life?
We have an active Torah study group every Saturday morning that's been going on for basically the whole pandemic. I think it's on Zoom.
And it's really gotten to be a central important thing.
And that's been it's helped us get more of a sense of belonging. We live 50 miles away from the synagogue, so it's a 100-mile round trip for us to come in person to either services or Torah study. So we usually had to choose: are we going to services Friday night, or are we going to Torah study on Saturday? You know, back and forth.
And we frankly, we didn't get to. We're more active.
We're more involved
since
now,
our kids
yeah.
were in religious school, when we had to drive the 100 miles to bring them to religious school.
Right.
We've been more involved, and if we didn't have that, that would be a big loss.
Right.
Wow. What do you do in Torah study? What's that like?
It's amazing.
I mean, I know you study Torah, but it's all different.
Myra's one of our leaders.
Well, we're going through it line by line, and so instead of doing the parasha of the week, we started at the beginning of Genesis, and
we're on chapter 38 of Genesis.
And it's been 2 years.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, I wish I knew what you knew.
I don't know if we know anything, but we have great discussions.
That is so meaningful to you, right? And what if somebody said to you, you can't come to Torah study, you live too far away, or somebody else made a decision for you to cut you off of Zoom? Or what if they stopped the Zoom?
They stopped the Zoom. It's a big issue for us, because, like, for example, services, we've gotten used to, we go every week. We never used to go every week. So if somebody said, oh, well, okay, we're cutting off Zoom now, we're having in-person services, it'd be a huge loss.
But the board doesn't intend to do that.
They don't plan to do it.
They're going to continue to have Zoom availability for services and for Torah study. And I think it's wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we do too. We do too.
We were saying for years that we needed to stream things, and of course it just didn't get done.
Yeah.
So it got done when it had to get done.
Right. Necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. Thank you. Edna, what gives you a sense of belonging? Tell us.
I second what Laura and Chris have had to say. I'm also in the Torah study group, but it's if I can say this without getting filled up with emotion, it's part of Sinai Reno's welcoming attitude towards me as a person.
Oh,
I was invited to come to the Torah study first when I was a student in URJ's Jewish study class. And when I went there, I knew that I would convert. I didn't know how long it would take me, but I started going to Torah study at Sinai Reno via Zoom, and I'm more than 100 miles away. I'm in Missouri.
wow, yes.
And I loved it so much that I had to get on an airplane and go meet everybody.
Oh, Edna.
And
I'm gonna cry.
they were equally welcoming in person. And
Oh.
so that gives me a great sense of belonging.
Oh, yes. And purpose and friends and
Yes, all of those things.
yeah. Wow.
In the chat, Helene posted Jewish friends and family. And I suspect that that's maybe at the core of belonging, right? You feel like you've got a group of folks who are friends, family. I mean, they're people that matter to you and you matter to them.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And in terms of this conversation, if they matter to you and you matter to them, then they've asked the kinds of questions that, can you get around in this building? Can you hear? Can you see? Does this learning style work for you? Which I think we don't ask at all enough. But
Oh, definitely. And I want to respond. IJ, is it okay if I talk about this with the group? Your question was so important. And this is another aspect that really, sorry.
No problem.
Oh, good. Okay, well, thank you. This is another aspect to what we're talking about right now. And the question or the comment, what about people with hidden disabilities, such as you have, and people without assistive devices? Other people are often disbelieving when they indicate they have disabilities and mock them or get annoyed with them. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, you have no idea. I think you do by asking that amazing, important question. Yeah, oh, hang on one second. Oh, well, I don't know why that's not closing. That's okay. So I'll give you an example of this in my own experience. When I was working at Jewish Family and Children's Service, we were all in cubicles. And I don't do well in cubicles. There's just so much noise and so much distraction. And the woman behind me was working with older adults, and many of them had hearing loss. And so she would talk in a very loud voice with her clients. And I'd be sitting there going, I can't talk to the people I need to talk to on the phone because I get so distracted. And this is a fact of life, even being medicated. It's the thing that, if there's so much going on and I'm not truly focused on something, I get distracted. And on top of this, the cube that I had was like at an intersection. There were like people coming from the side, people coming in front and back, and they love to stop in my cubicle. It's like, oh, let's sit down here for a minute and rest while we on this long trek back to our own cubes. And it was so distracting. I'm a student of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which essentially says that an employer has to provide a free, appropriate accommodation, a reasonable accommodation. Okay. And any employer could say, well, that costs too much, but now they have to prove that. So, but my accommodation would have been simple. I called my doctor. I said, I need a note from you. I need a doctor's note. to my employer stating that because of my disability, I need to work in a space that is not so disruptive. I needed a doctor's note. Unbelievable. So, but that's the law, documentation. So, okay, gave it to my supervisor. Oh yeah, I'm talking about it with my supervisor. 6 months later, they finally said, we have a spot 1 floor below, it's in the corner. We think that will be good for you. And I was like, well, finally, 6 months of me being distracted and not being able to do my job the way I wanted to do my job. And I checked out the space. It was fabulous. It was a corner and it was great. And I immediately said, yes, I'm going down there. And those were the most productive years of my job. But to have to feel that you have to justify everything just because you don't look, you have no outward signs of having a disability. Sometimes you just want to give up because you have to convince people, and people are always saying, well, you don't look disabled. And it's difficult. I agree. And let's, you know what? IJ, you had your hand up, I believe. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, didn't they ask you what you thought you would need first?
Yeah. Well, they did. But
When you gave them the note.
yeah, they said, well, yeah, let's talk about this. Let's think about this. And I said, I just need a space that isn't in a traffic pattern and there's not somebody with a really loud voice around me. Those were the obstacles to me. And social service agency, they want to take care of everybody. They want to do it right. And I think, they needed to figure out how to make this happen. And meantime, I'm like, I can't believe this. So,
Well, I worked in several social service agencies through the years.
yeah,
I've experienced, besides being Jewish, I've experienced a lot of negativity from employers when I say I'm disabled, and then they don't think to ask you,
right.
what do you think would assist you, or your doctor, or somebody other than the individuals that have never had training or experience in accommodating a disability.
Right, exactly. And so what was the best experience that you had asking for an accommodation?
I don't remember any good
Okay.
experiences.
Oh my gosh. Well, you are a great advocate then to share this with other people. This
Well,
experience.
you think if you worked in social services, if that was your field, you would have more empathy towards everybody, but a lot of people do not. They just want to appear to be helping people, but they really don't know how or don't really want to help people.
Yeah.
They just want the admiration.
It's the mitzvah project syndrome. No, but it's true. And with our son, I kind of skipped over this part, not intentionally. When he was 15, he was diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder. He had Asperger's syndrome. Now, he didn't just develop it at 15, he had it all his life, but it wasn't in the diagnostic and statistical manual that is used to diagnose people. And it was like he would do, he'd do something really well. And then his teachers would expect him to repeat that again and again. One of the issues for him was doing homework. And I don't know about you. Homework is okay. It's fine. I think it's necessary for a lot of people, but for some people, it's repetitive and it's more repetitive work. And a lot of people just get, like, I've already done this. I've already demonstrated this. And he, we had a conference one time and his teacher, it was his math teacher, she said, he's getting a D in this class. Now, I knew my son, of course, as his advocate and as his mother. And I knew that he got mathematical concepts. I knew that he was probably just, top of his class in knowledge acquisition. So I just decided to play the devil's advocate in my nice little gentle way. That I learned you could get more honey, more bees with honey. I don't know. It would be okay. I said, oh no, I'm terribly concerned that he's getting a D in this class. That's, how is he going to be able to forget about going to next year, to moving to the next, to the next grade? But how is he getting from topic to topic, from subject to subject in his class if he's getting D's and everything? And his teacher looked at me and she goes, here, let me show you something. She showed me his test scores. 98, 99, 89 test scores indicating he knew his math. And she said, no, he'll go to the next level. And I said, well, then don't give him a D. Let's talk about a way that he can demonstrate to you that he knows what this is. And I said, you work it out with him because he will tell you. And you know what you need. He'll tell you how he can make that happen. So it ultimately boiled down to the conversation. And I think that's really important. And I think as someone as people with disabilities, we have to just kind of get out on a limb sometimes when we're feeling like we're kind of in that less than supportive environment and just speak our truth.
Shelly, did you see Jeff's question, which I think is a really good one? Is it correct or appropriate to ask a new member, for instance, in a wheelchair or on crutches, what he or she needs, or does that make them feel other? I mean, I think we all kind of get nervous over that dance. I mean, I don't want to single you out because you walked in with a wheel. I mean, you didn't walk in because you rolled in with a wheelchair.
Right. Honestly, I think that, just because that person uses a wheelchair, I would do this instead. I would say, what's important to you about being here? If it's a new member, what do you want to do here? What's important to you? We're glad you're here. Let's make this a real positive thing. And not a positive thing, but I mean, what would you do with another member, another new person who didn't use a wheelchair? It's exactly the same thing. The wheelchair, the fact that the person uses a wheelchair is already a given. We can see that. So if we were to say to them, well, you use a wheelchair, what are you going to do? What can we do to make it easier for you? To make what easier for you? It's like seeing the disability. So again, going right away and having that conversation with a person, just like we're doing now. What gives you a sense of belonging? What do you hope? How were you raised? What was Jewish life like for you growing up? And even sharing a bit of ourselves too in conversation. First of all, starts to create a relationship where somebody will share what's important to them. And if the fact that they use a wheelchair may prohibit participation in certain parts of the building, for example, work with them, think together, and really come up with what would work for them. And you may find, for example, is there other space that is accessible that we could move this program to so this person can participate? So those are just a few things. I mean, I think one of the things about this conversation is it helps us think differently, but in a way, it also helps us think that we're already having these conversations with people. So now it's just saying, okay, We don't have to fix, we don't have to come up with solutions. We're in it together. So that's just some thoughts. IJ?
It's Iris, by the way.
Oh my gosh, Iris.
Well, I don't know how I got the IJ in there and said my first name, but sometimes that happens. What I was going to say is sometimes, like, for example, in employment, that would be the job of somebody, I feel, in personnel. And when you fill out an application or when you're going to an interview, there is a question there that you can check. And yes, I need an accommodation to go to this test or whatever, although you feel uncomfortable doing it because you think it might be a point against you. But also in organizations, wouldn't it be nice if somebody who was familiar with the subject was like appointed to be the person who has training or experience or kindness to approach that person and ask them, is there anything we can do to make it easier on you here? Or is there anything that's in your way, or however a person would want to put it, instead of like a bunch of people coming up. Because I've found that some people with wheelchairs resent just anybody coming up to them saying, oh, you need help or something.
Oh, yeah. That we want to be helpful, certainly, but if somebody uses a wheelchair, or somebody's a stranger on the street who's using a white cane, I mean, how weird would that be to go up to that person and say to them, oh, what can I do to help you? As if just because they use a white cane means they need help. Again, that is ableism right there. Those assumptions that we make. So would anybody else like to share what gives you a sense of belonging? This is really, really an important and really good way to begin to think differently about just being ourselves in our relationship with people with disabilities, mental health conditions, because belonging is so universal. Anyone else? Just go ahead and unmute yourself or raise your hand, whatever you'd like. Okay. Well, it's definitely something to think about, isn't it? And this really affects all areas of our lives. Somebody, I'm going to close this PowerPoint. By the way, this is my book, From Longing to Belonging. And there it is. And now we're going to stop sharing. Okay. Hi, everyone. It's really good to see you. Well, again, as part of my studies, I heard a speaker who said, people living with disabilities want what everybody else wants. And the sphere that is part of this are these areas: work, live, love, learn, play, and worship. 6 areas of life that are no different. And it's really interesting. There have been, oh, thank you. Thank you for getting that up there. It's really a good.
That's right. I pulled it off and had to type it in. So, but if that doesn't work, just Google TED Talk with her name, or TED Talk and danger of a single story, and it'll come up.
Yeah.
Probably easier than worry about the link.
Yeah. If you just do Chimamanda, it'll come up.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true.
And it's a very good TED Talk for all kinds of reasons.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it just applies to everything, every part of our life again, and how we think about people. When I first started my work in this field, I met a woman named Sharon who had moved to Minneapolis several years earlier. She lived in North Dakota. She and her parents went to a temple in North Dakota. There's not that many. There's not that many Jews in North Dakota, but she could never participate. She uses a wheelchair. She has cerebral palsy. It affects her speech, how she is heard. To get into the building, she had to be schlepped up the stairs, and not cool, of course. But that's how things were. And this was even before special education law or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was passed in 1975. She moved to Minneapolis because it was a bigger Jewish community. Being involved in the Jewish community, expressing her Jewish self, and making Jewish friends, having a synagogue to go to, were so important to her that she moved. She moved to get that in her life. And the sad thing is that for 14 years, she tried to have that in her life. And she would call synagogues and, and tell them that she wanted to visit, she wanted to stop by, she wanted to talk about being a member. And they would say to her right away, "Oh, we don't have people like you here. We don't have people like you here." I'm just thinking, well, aren't all people like her? But the thinking at the time was, no, it was discriminatory. And it's sad to think about, Jews were welcoming. We want to be welcoming. And the one place where you think that someone could find a home was shut off from them by gatekeepers. All these gatekeepers who knew only one thing about her. They knew that single story, that she was difficult to understand. We don't have people like you here. She told me when I met with her, when I started my job, I just said to her, "Tell me what's important to you." And then she said to me, "All I've ever wanted was to belong." Wow. Myra, go ahead.
Bunch of questions.
Okay.
Can I? One of them is the language. I always thought disabled was a bad term. I would not have understood that to be the acceptable term, and I thought differently abled was the right term. So now I'm confused.
Okay, let's clarify. Disability is just disability, person with a disability, a person with ADHD, a person with cerebral palsy, a wheelchair user. These are examples of person first language, which has been around for a really long time. Differently abled, no, because it's a euphemism. It doesn't.
Disability feels like, you've got this one bad thing up against all these other good stuff. I mean, and it does feel to me like somebody who doesn't have that ability may have another ability,
Well, right, except disability, you're right, disability is only one part of a person. And that's why person with a disability opens up that it helps to change from a kind of that fixed mindset to more of a growth mindset about person living with a disability. First of all, it's straightforward, it's factual. That's number one. Number two, it's not a bad word. And honestly, I can say that I live with a disability that makes me who I am. It's a part of me. And it's something that I celebrate because it's how my brain works. And I love that. I don't love parts of how it manifests in me, of course, but that's okay. So person first used to be just that gold standard until the autism community started talking about identity first. And I don't want to speak for all people with autism or all autistic people, because every individual is different. But a lot of people on the spectrum say, autism is so woven into who I am. It's part of my identity. And it's them describing themselves as autistic, as an autistic person. So there's a lot of you can't go wrong saying autistic or is autistic or has autism or lives with autism. And it's, it feels like there's a lot of ambiguity.
Yeah, it's probably like everything else you ought to ask.
Right. So here's the thing, I guess the upshot is this: if you ask somebody how they wanted to be referred to, they'd probably say, call me by my name.
Right.
Remembering that disability is just a part of somebody. And you know what? It's an important part. There's no question. We've been taught, and the term even disability is fraught with negative connotations, but it is for now the language that's preferred. And if you think about it, what were some of the terms from before? There were, I think, early in the 1900s, people were considered feeble-minded. There were institutions for the feeble-minded. There were one of the biggest disability organizations in the country, the ARC, used to be the Association for Retarded Citizens. And the R word, ooh, it's nails on a chalkboard kind of thing. So, you can look up online, what's the preferred language? I mean, it's okay to know that, but I know when I first started talking about this, when I was at JFCS, people were like, their tongues were kind of like all over the place trying to figure out the right language to use. And we get to make mistakes, and that's okay.
Okay, so I got some more. The
Go for it.
20% figure that you quoted for the United States, is that inclusive of mental health issues as well as physical disability, or is that just physical disabilities?
No, it is disability across the board. It is.
So it's all of it.
Yeah, there's like, I don't know how many categories legally there are for disabilities. Yeah, no, it is. And interestingly, children comprise the smallest percentage. And as we age, we acquire disabilities. And that's fine, so it's something, I don't even know, like 55% of people over 55 have a diagnosed disability.
So my last one is, I wonder if you can say anything to Jewish specific sorts of issues around disability. I'm thinking of, two things that popped into my head listening to you. Is the Talmud, for instance, assumes that deaf people are intellectually flawed. Being deaf meant you were stupid, or you were not just stupid, mentally not there, basically. Right. It's all over the Talmud. And so, in a contemporary setting, we have to wrestle with that. And I'm also thinking about, our whole, it seems to me Judaism is so set up. I'm thinking of bar, bat, or b, mitzvah, that, we're so focused on the literary. So people who are of a particular sort. So anybody with neurodiversity, I think we're almost set up to not include lots of aspects of that. And it's in our life cycle, and it's, well, what do you mean he's got reading disabilities? You got to read to be, you got to read like everybody else reads to be to do so much of what Judaism is.
Right. And I think one of the challenges and one of the opportunities is that we get to practice Judaism in ways that are meaningful to more people. And, it's, one of the, speaking of deaf, people who are deaf, and speaking of people who are non-speaking, which often comes along. So what do we assume about people who don't have spoken language? The assumption used to be, well, they're intellectually impaired. They're dumb. They're not smart. They're slow. They're low functioning. Those terms are just so annoying. A friend of mine did her PhD research on 6 people who didn't have spoken language and how spirituality and faith played a role in their lives. And without without just every single one of them had stories and had faith and had beliefs, unique beliefs to them. One of the participants was Jewish. He expressed himself in Jewish terms and what's important to him. It would be the same as anyone else, any other Jewish person. In other words, it was rich. His description to her was rich, and it was deep, and it was supremely meaningful. Faith in God, belief in God, belief in the practices of Judaism, all important. And for a lot of these people, whatever their faith, they were not allowed into practice because they didn't speak. And there are so many things in our practices that if we want to really make sure that anybody who wants to be part of the Jewish community gets to be part of the Jewish community. And if the way we've always done something isn't going to work for them, that does not have any bearing on intelligence or anything like that. It simply means that we've got to work together to find ways to achieve a life cycle event, a bar mitzvah. And it may look different. Instead of a Devar Torah, maybe it's a painting, maybe it's a PowerPoint, maybe it's something that that somebody else gives on behalf of that person or writes with that person and supports that person. There's just so many, our expectations are limiting us. I really believe that. And yeah, we can go back to Talmud, we can go back to the mum discussion, the blemishes discussion about,
Yeah.
and what is that about? That's about who is qualified to serve in the temple as a Kohen. We don't have a temple anymore. That person could do a whole host of other things in contribution to the community. That's what we have to look at. And I want to also share with you this idea that is pretty uncommon when we are working with a person with a disability. And that is simply this: the dignity of risk. Just like any of us make decisions about our lives, far too often there will be people who say, oh, they can't do that. What if they get hurt? What if it's a mistake? What if something happens? The flip side of that is, what if it's absolutely wonderful? Or what if it's a learning experience? Or what if we work together? The dignity of risk is something, I think, as human beings is inherent. It's how we grow. And I think that Jewish life is a perfect place to risk, to take chances without a lot of ramifications. And there's just so much that has changed. And just so you know, there's training on B'nai Mitzvah for neurodiverse students. There's a book, God willing, coming out soon on B'nai Mitzvah and tutoring and working with kids and working with families. So there's a lot of movement, and that is amazing. That is really, really important.
I think I saw a hand. Was it Edna? Somebody had a hand up.
I think it was
Yeah,
Ira.
yes,
Oh,
I
Edna.
did.
Yes, sorry, Edna.
I just thought while you were talking, one of the things that the synagogue where I attend in Kansas City has done this thing that really helps me. And, you know, I just noticed it when I got there. They've been doing it. And that's to have name tags, because I don't remember names very well. And it takes me, Zoom helps me.
Yeah.
But have just that simple act of having name tags.
Yeah.
And I was thinking while you were talking, one of the things that synagogues, even the big synagogues that have programs on every Erev Shabbat and Shabbat service, politics has sign language, but rabbis don't have people that do sign language. And that just popped into my head.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah. Yeah. There, you know, it's interesting because Hebrew signing, I mean, there's it's like somebody would have to know Hebrew Sign Language to be not only interpret it, but to be the recipient of the interpretation.
But even the English parts, they
Yeah.
don't have sign for.
Yeah.
And yes, the Hebrew would present a roadblock by itself.
But you know what? Somebody's going to pick up on that.
Well, I
And
wonder what they do in
possible.
Israel. Is there
There's
sign
plenty,
language?
there's
Yes.
plenty, yeah,
Yeah,
who do.
Hebrew Sign Language, Israeli Hebrew Sign Language.
And really, is it Hebrew? I mean, if the word is Baruch, and you know what that means, is that a different sign than blessed in English?
I don't know.
I don't think it is. I mean, I think ultimately it's somebody who knows, it's somebody who's multilingual, like any other
Right.
interpreter, right? I
Yeah.
mean, if I'm going to do Spanish to English people, I have to know Spanish and I have to know English. So if I'm going to sign the Hebrew, it seems to me it's not a different enterprise. And there are, I remember from a long time ago that there were texts with guidance for those signing Hebrew.
Wow.
Because you might want to know, for instance, that in Hebrew, kadosh doesn't exactly translate to holy in English. So you need to get the sort of the set apart part in there.
That would be amazing to have available.
So there is that. I know there is that.
Yeah. There could be so much, you know, and I know rabbis that have signed the priestly benediction. I mean, just any number of things. And it's not like, oh yeah, we're going to do this one nice thing for this person. That can be a practice for everyone. When you think about accommodations, these things, they benefit a lot of people.
And I was thinking about, I go to nursing homes and I hear how people refer to the patients in nursing homes. They never call them by name. It's especially, you know, older people are honey or sugar or
Right?
They never hear their names. And then people wonder why they're so screwed up in the head. I mean, if I never heard my name, I might forget my name. Do you see what I'm saying? And I forget enough things it is.
Yeah, I'd like to second that, what Edna just said. My mother was the valedictorian of her high school class, and she went on and had a very successful career as an English teacher for many, many years. And
Then she had a stroke.
And then she had a stroke, and it affected her ability to speak. And she
had aphasia.
Eventually was in a long-term care facility because she needed more and more care as she got older. And Laura and I both noticed that you know,
they treated her like a 2-year-old.
She sort of got infantilized.
It was terrible.
And she was a very intelligent woman who had really done a lot in her life. And, you know,
she still understood everything. She just couldn't express.
Couldn't bring it out.
But yeah, it was very frustrating. And we lived across the country. There wasn't really anything we could do, but
oh
yeah.
God. that's heartbreaking. And, it's to not hear your name. That's your identity.
Yeah.
It's tied in. Oh,
Luckily, she had one good friend who, that, it was one of those, there was the people, she was in the sort of high care part, but the people that lived in apartments and that one friend came and visited her and treated her as if she still had a brain. And I think, she talked to her the way she always did.
Yeah.
And so I think that really helped. But
yeah, and that's where we need so much more of that. And I have to think that with COVID, it's gotten worse because of short staffing and just so much stress on everybody.
yeah.
Yep.
I was talking to my aunt last night. She's recently widowed. My uncle died in November.
Mhm.
And so she met with her tax accountant. He's been an amazing guy for both of them for many years. And my aunt went with her daughter, my cousin, to this appointment to go over her taxes.
And they only talk to the daughter.
Right.
How did you know?
Because I've
Because,
seen it happen.
we have my 98-year-old mother that we're
I've
helping to
seen
care
it
for, and they're
happen.
always doing that.
Right.
Exactly. And my aunt is sitting there, and he got done talking to my cousin, and my aunt said, "You know what? I'm glad you explained that to my daughter. These are my taxes. This is my life. Now you need to explain everything to me." And he just, my aunt has, my aunt doesn't put up with crap. That's all I have to say. And I'm like her a lot, thank goodness. But so he felt so bad, right? He didn't realize it.
Right.
I said
It was
to her-
unconscious. Right.
Right. And I said to her, "How did you feel while all this is going on?" And she said, "I felt angry. I felt isolated. I felt diminished. And I really wanted to just say, I am not stupid and I am not dead."
Mhm.
And when we think about that, it's done all the time, not only to older adults, but to people with disabilities.
Yeah.
And imagine, I think one of the things that we encounter in Judaism is that in our communities, a lot of our religious schools have really become providing more inclusive education. And, it's like leading up to B'nai Mitzvah, and then what? Do kids who have been included get to join youth group? Get to be valued in youth group? Do they go on to make more Jewish friends, be involved in more Jewish things throughout their lifespan, or are they just cast off? I mean, it's just, it's a mountain of hurt there, first of all. And we talk about kindness, but we can't mistake kindness for patting somebody on the head and saying, "Oh, well, I'll help you here," or "I'll figure this out for you." Until we see another person, we see that divine spark in another person, it's not going to happen. My rabbi has said this quite a bit, and I love it, and I quote him a lot. He said, when you meet somebody with a disability and you look into their eyes and you see the spark of the divine there, you won't wonder how to treat them. You'll know. Norman Cohen, of course.
Nice. So
Yeah.
we are kind of pushing towards the end of our hour and a half, and I'm wondering if anybody else has other questions for Shelly, or if you want to kind of wrap it up, although you just did beautifully quoting Norman.
I'll tell him.
Tell him hi.
I will. Oh my gosh, yes.
He grew up good.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to throw in anything? I think, for me, the major thing I'm going to walk away with, and I think this is true through all our sessions, and Jeff, this kind of speaks to what you asked, and Chris, you asked a similar question when you asked about those Indian folks who came for the shots the last time.
Right.
I think if you ask people, but you ask people in a way that's the same way you're asking anybody else about who they are and what you want to know about them, as opposed to, there's ways to ask and there's ways to ask. I thought about that question afterwards, Chris, and I think a lot of people might have done what you did and it would have been wrong, but it wasn't wrong coming from you, because I know the story, Shelly, was Chris has been giving out vaccinations, and and Chris and Laura lived in India for a while, and there was an Indian couple that came up, and he thought they were from Southern India, and he was looking for some ways to do Southern Indian
Because
food.
they were dark. Southern Indian people tend
Well,
to
and
be
their
darker.
name, you knew that,
And their name.
you know
right.
about last name.
The question was, he went up to them and said, are you from Southern India? And was that, sort of, and I think it's where it comes from. Some people could have done that, and I think it would have been horrendous. Knowing it came from you, Chris, and knowing how it probably came from you, I knew right away it wasn't problematic.
Right.
Because it was it was about being interested in that person as a person, and some other things about that identity that were really of interest to you, and it wasn't singling them out. So I think the thing about asking, if again you're asking as a part of a whole picture of wanting to know somebody and recognizing the divine in them, that's where you go. And
I think there's real power in looking into people's eyes and seeing that divine spark. I like that. I like that a lot.
Mm.
I was lucky when I was practicing in family medicine. I had a medical assistant who spoke sign language. Her grandparents had been both deaf, so she grew up learning sign. And so we had in my practice quite a significant number of deaf people, because we were able to communicate with them. And I was so grateful for her, for my medical assistant, because she would do this magic, and we could have I think a pretty reasonable conversation back and forth. But it was looking in their eyes is what worked for me,
That's right. That's right. If you've ever traveled somewhere where you didn't speak the language, you kind of get a sense of what that's like. It's like, you kind of go, well, I want to participate. Talk to me. I'm not stupid. I don't want to look stupid. It's like Alexander Hamilton. I'm not stupid. I love that line. Oh my gosh. I am so grateful to have spent this time with you today. And I just, feel free to reach out.
We are grateful to you. Thank you so much. And I want to let folks know that the next session, which is, I believe, May 1st, I think that's Sunday, May 1st, is going to be about, and again, boy, talk about language. Here's one. What we have been calling, I'm not sure, euphemistically for a while, Jews by choice. People who become Jewish, who convert. I mean, we got, again, it's that same question. We got away from the word convert because that felt like it was icky labeling. But we're all Jews by choice, right? I mean, ultimately. So anyway, whatever you call that category of people who were not born Jewish and have come to it, we're going to have a few folks presenting their stories, including ways that they might have felt welcome into the community and ways that they might not have felt welcomed into the community, depending on their story and what their truth is. And I hope we'll have a lot of folks participating as well, in addition to those who are presenting, who may have similar experiences to share. So that's what's coming up in May. Jeffrey, anything you want to add? Good to see you. You are looking good.
Thank you.
And again,
I think for Shelly, the comment from me, rather than saying what people did wrong or badly, when you give an example of something that worked and is positive, I think that's really very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we can all think of situations where we did something wrong or wish we had a better vocabulary. So I like your idea of having someone new in the community and just asking him or her what they are there for, what they need, what they want, whether they're blind or deaf or not, or whatever, just to treat everyone the same. I like that.
Yeah. Simply human.
Thank you.
in the image of God, the Tselem Elohim. So thank you all. Thank you again, Shelly, and thank you those who came. And Jeffrey, when we get this up online, if you can let people know that it's there.
I'll do that.
That would be great, because I don't know how to do that. All right, I'm going to turn off the recording and someday you'll show me. And I'm gonna, doing yes, I want to stop the recording.